choice. Normally I would just do this on like a flip chart and just draw it. So as a compromise, you get slides that look like they've been drawn on a flip chart. So is anybody familiar with the idea of, or the concept of vertical and horizontal coaching? Has anybody sort of heard those terms before?
I have from you, but that's all.
Okay, so everyone's fresh to it. Cool.
Totally are, yeah.
So, somebody said yes? All right. So, horizontal coaching is basically what we do most of the time. It's teaching new skills. You can kind of think of it as what and how coaching. So this is what we do, this is how we do it. Building new skills. Vertical coaching is looking more at new perspectives and often the why side of things. So when we talk in agile terms about mindset, what we're often talking about is a vertical coaching development. Whereas when we're talking about this is how you do stand-ups and so on, that's more of a horizontal type of coaching. And by the way, if you guys have questions, this should be a conversation, not just me talking. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments, just don't put them in the chat, just come off mute and ask. Otherwise you're just going to hear me drone on for a while. So basically there's a chart of sort of competence over time. People grow slowly over time in their skills, but eventually you get to a place where you get stuck. And more skills type coaching just doesn't seem to help. And we've all seen people who are, people, teams and organisations who are like this, where they've been in a place for a long time and teaching them more skills just doesn't seem to help. We've seen individuals who just don't get better at their job. We've seen teams that just don't get better at delivering. We've seen organisations that just don't get better at doing whatever it is that they do. They get stuck in this place and just can't move no matter how much you teach them. A lot of large organisations are like this. They're kind of stuck and they're desperately trying to be coached on skills to get them out of this stuck place, and it just doesn't seem to be working. So from this stuck place, the place you need to go is vertical. So from a stuck place, the thing that, oh, Steve's here. I'll just let him in. Whoops.
He couldn't resist you, Dave.
He could, no, who can?
Hey, Steve.
So from a stuck place, what you often need is not more skills, but just a new way of looking at the problem to be able to progress. And that sort of means new mental models. Yeah? Is that making sense to people so far? Now, you don't have to be stuck, by the way, to get new mental models involved. One of the best ways to not get stuck is to keep your mental models evolving. And keeping those mental models evolving is exactly what we're doing in vertical coaching.
Just link into the unlearning stuff, Dave.
Yeah, look, it can do. Sometimes changing a mental model means unlearning an existing one. Sometimes a model can sit next to an existing one. Sometimes it'll replace or just add on to one. But yeah, sometimes you do actually have to give up one model in order to pick up a new one.
Yeah, no, it's just your language. Your language really reminded me of his language, because he talks about changing a perspective, which starts to, look at your mindset and mental model a bit different. Yeah.
So the classic example is like a leader, and that they have trouble with delegation. You can teach, and quite often they'll get coaches in to teach. This is how you delegate, and give them skills around delegation, or it might be feedback or whatever. But all those, they still just don't do the things. And when you look at it from a vertical perspective, it's because their sense of identity is tied up so much in being the one who makes all the decisions, which makes it very hard for them to actually delegate. So teaching them new skills is not going to make them a better delegator. What you need to do is help them develop a mental model where they're not the one who has to make all the decisions. So flip from I'm in charge of all the decisions to I'm in charge of the system through which decisions are made. Might be the flip you want them to make. That's a vertical step that will then let them apply the skills that they know. Because just teaching them skills, not really helping. A lot of this work, by the way, has come out of work with sports people. Skills-wise, turns out there's very little difference between the top 200 tennis players in the world. They can all hit the ball about as hard, about as accurately, with about the same error rate. Number 1 in the world to number 200 in the world, the skills difference is very, very small. But yet what you see is the same people consistently beating, the ones in the top 10 are consistently beating everybody else. And if it's not a skills gap, what is it? And what this work has shown is that it's not the skill, it's the way they approach each point. It's the mental model they have of the point that determines whether once your skills are at the right level, whether you're number 1 in the world or number 200 in the world. And it turns out the people who are number 1 in the world, if they hit a bad point, they will quite often then go on and hit a good point next time. But the 200 player in the world, they hit a bad point, they'll hit another bad point and another bad point, and they'll have a bad run of points. You see it quite often, they'll get their serve broken once, and then they go on to lose the match, to have, not winning very many games after that. Once they're on a bad run, they'll keep on a bad run. And that's a mental model thing. It's the same in, in your work. Your mental model, helps you apply the skills that you've got. So if we apply this to agile coaching, which is kind of what most of us are in here for, horizontal growth is things like how to do, doing stand-ups, manage backlogs, run retros, how to improve at those skills. Often what people need, though, to really, and we see this quite often in the agile world, is people who are doing agile. They do all of the things, but they don't actually become agile. Oh, yeah, we're doing stand-ups, we're doing, we're doing retros, but it still takes us 18 months to deliver. It still takes, we still don't have autonomous teams. We're not actually being agile. What we need then is a new mental model that allows you to understand things like complexity, uncertainty, feedback loops, and systems. Because that's not in most mental models. Most people's mental models don't handle complexity and uncertainty particularly well. And if you look at agile, it's really asking you to have a very, very sophisticated relationship with uncertainty. The whole idea of I'm going to set a date for something, but I don't know what I'm going to deliver on that date. The whole fix the date, float the scope concept. That's quite a sophisticated relationships with uncertainty there. The whole idea of feedback loops and complex systems, again, is quite a sophisticated way of looking at the world. And this is the gap, I think, where we get doing but not being, is we're doing horizontal development, but we haven't done the vertical development to develop the mental models to allow you to really apply those skills properly. Is that making sense? I see some thoughtful people.
You can apply that to the current situation as well, changing your mental model, you understand complexity, uncertainty, what feedback loops.
Absolutely. If you look at the responses to the pandemic from different world leaders, you see very, very different responses. You see, on one hand, you've got the Jacintas of the world who look like they have quite a good handle on things like complexity, uncertainty, have a very different style of response to the Boris Johnsons and Donald Trumps of the world, who possibly don't have quite that same ability to grasp complexity. And a lot of the time, if you can't grasp complexity, you will reject complexity. We've kind of, has anybody had that conversation with a stakeholder where you've sort of been talking about, this is really complicated, really complex. There's all these factors. It's a big system. There's all these feedback loops. So we've got to be a little bit careful about the way we handle this. Not come back and say, no, it's really, really simple. All we have to do is punish the people who aren't following the rules, or something like that.
Dave, hi, this is Michael here. I've had quite a few conversations, and it's not about the complexity. It's especially with more senior people, it's about them asking them to let go of how they got where they are, and to think differently, and having that moment to let go and convince them to open their mind is that first step before you can get that vertical growth. And I have that conversation over and over again, because
that's right. Yeah. And as you sort of, for very senior people, they are quite used to quite complex situations. They're managing large organisations. They kind of have that in their mental model. A lot of other people, they haven't developed that yet. But yeah. I've spoken to a lot of quite senior people who often don't necessarily. They don't. It's more the uncertainty. They have a I can almost call it an addiction to the illusion of control. So the ability to let go of the illusion of control and actually accept that things are uncertain is quite foreign to a lot of mental models, particularly in people who've sort of gone up through the ranks and are. And are in senior positions now. Any other questions on this so far?
That feels like everyday life, right? When people would reject that it's too VUCA or too complex.
Yeah.
Any tips on how do we tackle that, though?
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Look, in the past, so up until about the 1950s, even a little bit earlier than that, so 1920s, most people never really encountered complexity in their lives. It was a much simpler time. Your job was quite simple and structured. You probably followed on in your father's footsteps and did the things that your father did. If you were unlucky enough to be born female, then your life was a couple of years of school, then getting married and having kids. It was a very much simpler way of being. So having a mental model that was not embracing complexity didn't really matter, because you never really encountered it. It was only when you sort of became a village elder or a mayor or whatever, that you actually started to encounter a complexity, and you started to encounter, and you get people who are older people tended to get those sort of roles, and they had time to build up this mental model. These days, people are born into a very complex world. It's an incredibly complex world, and not having a mental model that incorporates complexity is actually, I'm actually finding it, for a lot of people, it's quite harmful. And it's where things like, the Trumpism and all this going back to the strongman leaders is coming from, because they're presenting a very simple picture of the way the world works. And a lot of people are very drawn to that because they don't see complexity and reject complexity and go, no, it's really simple. It must be what the Donald tells me it is. You see this a lot in conspiracist thinking, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's basically related to this. And we're seeing it more and more as the world becomes more and more complex. So is everyone familiar with the Cynefin framework? People have seen that? Yeah, a few nods. Yep. Yeah. So 4 different types of problems: obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic. With disorder in the middle. That's great. Not everybody sees it that way. A lot of people don't see the Cynefin framework looking like this. What they see is that. There are obvious problems and there are complicated problems that we can analyse our way out of it. There is nothing else. Everything else you're talking about, where you're talking about feedback loops and systems, is just a big, I don't understand that, I don't comprehend it, I can't see it. And that's a problem. Because more and more of our problems are actually occurring in the complex and chaotic spaces, because that's the world that we're living in right now. Particularly in the sort of pandemic world, we're living in a very, very chaotic space. So, this is a chart. This is basically the way people used to, or people thought that adult development worked. Basically, you're born, by sort of like the age of 20, you're about as developed as you're going to be. And then it's basically a big flat line until you sort of hit about 60, and then it's that rapid decay into dotage, senility, and death.
You paint a good picture, mate.
It's very dark.
It's an awesome it is. It's a terrible, terrible picture.
Imagine if we didn't learn anything after we were 20.
Why doesn't accelerate 60 means retirement?
Well, and this is what, when they actually looked, this was the traditional view of it. You know, you become an adult, you're an adult for quite a while, and then you become old and start to decay, which is, it's a very bleak picture of the way people are, particularly for those of us who are closer to the downslope than the upslope. Now, fortunately, it turns out that this view of adult development is absolute and utter crap. It does not work this way. What this actually looks like, my mouse is too sensitive. There we go. What it actually looks like is this. So you're born, you grow into an adult, and then as an adult, there are distinct developmental stages that people move through. Now, the ages here are slightly, it's kind of indicative. Some people will go through all the stages quite early in their life, depending on the way their life journey takes them. Some people will stay at one level for a very, very long time. It all kind of depends. It just happens that you tend to go through these stages, the higher stages, later in life than earlier in life, because you build up more life experience. Now, these stages... Yeah?
You heard of the guy, was it Elliot Jacks?
Elliot, who is it?
His name's Elliot Jacks. He's a controversial guy, but he reckons to go, and it mirrors what you said, you're drawing there. It takes 15 years to go to each elevated step through your career progression. That was his mental model. That's
not entirely wrong, but it's not entirely right either. So a lot of what I'm basing this on is the work of a guy called Bob Kegan, who is a developmental psychologist from Harvard. He's probably one of the pioneers in the field of adult development, which is quite a new field, by the way. There's a lot of work done quite early on, sort of 1800s, early 1900s, on childhood development, because people recognised there were distinct stages that children worked through as they were growing. But that blue picture prevailed. It was, you grew up and you basically stagnated and then you died. This idea of adult development actually has really come about kind of since the 1970s. So it is quite a new field. So Bob Kegan's, you can go through these stages quite quickly. So, people have been known to go through, Kegan identifies 5 stages, other people identify more, it doesn't really matter, but people have seen people go through 5 stages in a year. Usually that's in response to some sort of trauma that drives growth, but it is possible to go through these quickly. At the same time, some people stay stuck at one level for a long, long time. Now, Kegan has names for these. This early piece, sort of the pre-10 stuff, there's a lot of the pioneer in childhood development was a guy called Piaget. He was a French guy. He identified, I think, 8 stages of childhood development. I can only remember one of them, which is concrete operational. Adult development, people don't worry about that. They just lump it all in as one big bucket that they call the magical childhood mind. You grow out of that early teens, late 20s. By early teens, you're probably in a state that they're calling self-sovereign. And this is where, has anybody got teenagers?
Yeah, Dave, I do. And I can just say, this is Kate here. We actually, my daughter, I didn't say we then, had to do an assessment about a week and a half ago, an infographic actually on the teenage brain versus the adult brain. So I can say this is very close to home at the moment with a 14-year-old. And given this was actually her assignment on actually talking about the 3 functions of the teenage brain and what causes that anxiety, and tying in with your emotional thinking versus your logical rational thinking, which ties in with that socialized stage where you're more mature in terms of the brain, and the brain is actually becoming smaller. So you're actually making that more rational decision making. Yeah, correct. So it is very interesting, and even from her perspective, she could say, I actually do make very good rational decisions. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do any of these things or whatever else, do you know what I mean? Which I do not want to hear from a 14-year-old daughter. But it was very good to translate it as a parent, but also from a learning perspective of how, they can make rational decisions, but it's going to be that kind of other things that becomes emotional.
The rational decisions are driven by an irrational view of the world. So although they are rational within their own frame, they're not rational to an outside observer often.
Yeah. They haven't had that life experience yet.
Yeah. So the idea of self-sovereign is where, and for people who don't, if you have teenagers, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. If you don't have teenagers, then either you've got that to look forward to, or you've not got kids. So self-sovereign is where everything is about me. It's all about me. What do I want? What are my desires? How can I satisfy what I want? So everything is very me-centered. Some adults never grow out of that, by the way. Relationships in self-sovereign space are very transactional. It's what's my relationship with you going to give to me? There are people who may actually be president of a very large and powerful nation who may not have ever got out of the self-sovereign state. So people can go a long way in this sort of state. They may not do it in a particularly healthy way, but they can get there. By the late teens,
the Greeks invented a god to describe that, so that's been a feature of human behaviour for a very long time.
Yeah, and kind of by the time you're hitting late teens, you're starting to get into what they call a socialized space. And this is where those teenagers go into that state where they're desperate to fit in. They have their social group and they're desperate to fit in, and they want to show their individuality by being as identical to all their social group as they possibly can be. This is called the socialized mind. And this is basically where 60% of the adult population tends to sit. They've become socialized in teenagehood, and they stay socialized through the rest of their lives. And you get socialized into different things. You may be socialized into a group of friends, like a social group, or it might be a work environment. You can identify. Basically, what socialized means is you identify very strongly with a group. So you take on a group identity as your own identity, and that might be I am a member of a church. It might be bikie gangs are probably a classic socialized space. Work, you identify very strongly with your organisation or with your role. You get a lot of people say, I am, I am a software developer, I am a project manager, rather than I work as a. So you socialize, you get socialized quite heavily, and you take this group identity as your own identity. That's socialized. Next step up is what they call self-authoring, which is where you can take a look at the values from your group and actually decide, do I really believe that or not? You start to develop your own set of values and beliefs that you can then use to guide your life. So you can be aware of the groups around you and their values, but you will have your own set of values that you'll live by. Probably 30% of the population is kind of sitting there. Self-transforming, that's hard to describe. It's basically where your mind has become flexible enough that you're aware that you're aware of your own mental models, and you're aware that they are incomplete and flexible. So you will actually start to transform your own mental models. And for the purposes of tonight, probably not going to talk too much about self-transforming people, because there's only about 5% of the people, 5% of adults are at that sort of stage. Most interactions we're going to be having with people are people who are either in the self-authored or the socialized space. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah. They're just on the self-authored one.
Yeah, self-authored.
Yeah, this needs a bit of, for the self-awareness, there is an acceptance that needs to happen, isn't it? Where that's kind of a prerequisite to understand your own self, to understand where the flaws are going,
yeah.
Which needs a meta kind of thought process to yourself.
Yes. That's what we call, and I think it's kind of preempting my next slide here, what we call a subject-object switch. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, you're right. You need to be able to look at something from outside and be aware of it. For someone in a socialized mind, if you ask them, how do you know you've done a good job? They'll say things like, oh, people have given me good feedback. I know because others have told me. Somebody in a self-authored space, they'll probably say things like, well, you know when you've done a good job because you've done a good job. They know when they've done a good job because they've got their own internal compass. I hit all the dates, I did this, I did this, I did this. I know I've done a good job, and I don't need the reassurance of others to know that I've done a good job. So that's kind of the difference between the socialized and the self-authored there.
Dave, a quick
Any other questions there?
Does this model have a name? And I'm sorry, I missed it if you...
Yeah, this is Bob Keegan's model. He calls it forms of mind, I think is his term for it.
Theory of adult development.
Trouble is, theory of adult development, there are multiple things called theory of adult development,
okay.
And they're all different. So you put two psychologists in a room together, and they'll come up with 3 separate theories that don't agree with each other. So there are multiple models here. I'm using the Keegan one at the moment, A, because it's the simplest, and B, because it's the one I know the best. But there are others that say pretty much the same thing. In fact, here they are. So yeah, Keegan has his forms of mind. Susan Cook-Reuter has what she calls her sense making. Torbert has his action logic. So has anybody read the article, it was on the Harvard Business Review years ago, 7 Transformations of Leadership? We talked about leaders being, what were they, opportunists, diplomats, experts, achievers, and so on. That's Torbert's stuff, and he's since expanded that. The HBR article, by the way, now is about 15 years out of date. So if you've not read his new work, go and read his new work, because it's a lot better than the HBR article, and the HBR article was quite awesome. So he splits it up into a lot more different states. O'Fallon has his stages with all sorts of interesting names there. there are rough equivalences between them. This applies to organisations as well. So if you look at something like Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organisations and his different levels of organisational development, they really map quite neatly onto here. So he's got his, he is colour coding. He's got his red organisations, which are the top-down bureaucratic type organisations. They relate really, really nicely to a socialised mindset. So you can always talk about an organisation having a socialised mindset if they're in that red state. Then he's got the orange organisations that are more like results-driven meritocracies. That relates quite nicely to a self-authoring state. And then you go up into the what he calls green organisations, which are kind of more like hard to describe, more like a family, sort of family type dynamic. Agile organisations would be in the green state. And then he talks about these organisations called Teal, and I don't know why he chose teal as his ultimate colour. He might just like the colour a lot. But Teal organisations and green organisations, green is kind of on the border between self-authoring and self-transforming, whereas Teal organisations, which is this state where the organisation has no hierarchy and it's sort of a collection of people doing their jobs. Amazing if you can get that to work, but that's kind of a self-transforming organisation where you're actually reinventing the organisational structure of the thing every day because circumstances are changing. And that's really what self-transforming people do to their own mental models every day. So a lot of this actually relates really, really nicely to organisational transformation as well, which is kind of cool.
Dave, does it relate too nicely? Like, does it really hit a cognitive bias for things to line up neatly as opposed to reality might not so?
Oh yeah. None of these are drawn as nice straight lines on this slide. They're not straight lines. The borders are very, very fuzzy. There's not clean lines. In fact, most people are not in. If we sort of go back to this chart here, most people are not in one of these flat states. They're actually in these transitional states. They're somewhere between socialised and self-authored. And in some of their interactions, they'll be working in a self-authored way. In some of their interactions, they're working in a socialised way. And you see this a lot where people might be quite self-authored at work, but quite socialised at home or in the community, or vice versa. They might be heavily socialised into a work environment, but able to express themselves more and have their own set of values outside of a work environment. So yeah, these charts are all very pretty, and they're kind of a rough equivalence, but yeah, there's a lot of grey that's not shown here. And yes, the translation to organisations is not as neat and simple as it looks at first, but it's still a useful comparison to make. As I say, all models are wrong. It's just some of them are right just enough to be useful.
Dave, one small thing. In your experience, have you noted down when transformation just goes to shit, right? And if you look at spiral dynamics, the blue is where, everything is written by procedure and process without understanding the value of it. Is there, I find a correlation over there between when people just do what they are told and the transformation going and the blue state of spiral dynamics aligning well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at that in this sort of model, what you're really looking at there is a heavily socialised space. So people take on the values of the group, or in this case, the organisation, and basically do what they're told. If you then try and flip that organisation into something that looks like an agile organisation, you're basically flipping it from blue to green without going through orange.
But orange is the one which creates options, isn't it? Where orange looks at rules, but you look at the rules in a way you allow to get your things done. Where that is where most of the okay kind of organizations stand out. Whereas green is where we need to be, where it's emergent. The difference between emergent change and enforced but coached change. I'm not sure, but
So what tends to happen with these sort of blue type organisations, which I think are red in Lulu's model as opposed to, I don't know why Lulu and Wilbur chose different colours. It's terribly confusing. But these heavily socialised organisations, when they transform, what they tend to do is they transform themselves in a socialised way, which basically means they rewrite their procedures.
Correct.
What they're not doing is changing their mental model. So they're still following a procedure and not understanding the value of anything that they're doing because they're just doing what they're told. It just happens that the new process says, do a stand-up, do a retro, do a whatever. And it's the missing bit is this vertical coaching component. And that, I think, has been the big hold-up in Agile transformation. I think because Agile requires you to have this relationship with complexity and uncertainty, and you don't really develop that until you start to become self-authored. You don't really even see complexity properly until you're in that transition to self-authorship. So we need to start building this vertical development into the way we coach in agility so that we can take organisations from that very process-oriented socialised space to a more self-authored space where they understand the value of the things that they're doing. Okay.
You're missing a little bit of fun on today. Sorry. Steve is cracking us up.
There's a chat going on, is there? I can't. When I'm presenting, I can't see the chat.
Don't worry.
So if there's any good questions coming up in the chat, can somebody just relay them to me? Because I can't see them.
Jenny had a question. Jenny, do you want to ask directly?
Yeah, do ask directly because.
Well, yeah, my question was like pretty much at the beginning, but if it's still time to ask, now I have to go back to my question. So I'm kind of concerned about the concept of being uncertain and in projects, change projects, there is a huge thing when teams face uncertainty. So my question is, from an agile perspective, how do you manage uncertainty within the team itself and in a large scale transformation?
That's probably it's a made up all on its own. That's a big topic, that one. A lot of it.
Well,
is not
in a personal sphere, like in a personal bubble of how do I deal with that, maybe in an agile perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways of dealing with uncertainty. One of them is this is the classic one, is to pretend that it doesn't exist. So everything is going to follow the schedule, and it's going to follow the schedule regardless of what the universe actually says. And that's the way we tend to run a lot of projects. Talk about the illusion of control, this illusion of certainty. We have a schedule, we're going to run to the schedule, it's going to be awesome. The other way to look at uncertainty, probably the other extreme, is to just embrace it and go, we're going to do some things and things are going to change and we're going to learn from that and we're going to evolve towards a better way of doing things. So that there's different ways of, they're kind of two extreme positions, and then somewhere in the middle is kind of where you're going to land.
But Dave, there's not uncertainty everywhere, right? So when you're doing you don't blow up everything. So you need a scaffold for people to feel they have a platform, and then you change the parts of the organisation that you're disrupting on purpose. So don't overstate that everything's chaotic in a transformation. It doesn't work like that.
No, it's not. Look, a lot of things are complex and a lot of things are chaotic, but not everything is complex and chaotic.
So if I can add something.
Dig into that one a little bit. If you look at ANZ, what they did, for example, tipped everything into a jar and basically started from scratch. And they got clarity of purpose, what they wanted to do, but it was completely chaotic in the early stages where no one really knew what they were doing.
And that's also a very creative space to be in. In Cynefin terms, that's sitting down in that chaotic system and Snowden talks a lot these days about the liminality and deliberate dives into chaos to breed innovation.
But they still do that clarity of purpose in that direction, which is where I think is there is some purposeful change, but it's chaos until you actually get to that level.
They had a container though, right, Steve? So that they had a process that was HR driven, that was holding the chaos at bay to a degree. But you're right. I go back to Cotter, right? They totally unfroze everything, got rid of all the PMs, which, you could argue that whether that's a good idea or not. But it did. It really was a spill and fill. But the HR process was supposed to bring it back to some semblance of normality, I suppose.
Yeah. And that idea of clarity of purpose is very much a self-authored type of concept. If we sort of bring it back to the adult development side of things. I've not worked at ANZ. It's kind of a Melbourne gig. They tend to probably looking at taking a quite socialised organisation, giving it clarity of purpose, which is a self-authored thing. So again, there's that sort of vertical transformation involved there as well. But I'm going to push on a bit because we're having an awesome conversation so far, but we are running out of time. So we talk.
Sorry. If we were to kind of go a little over, are you guys okay with that? Just wanted to probably bring it.
I'm cool with it. I could talk about this all night.
A thumbs up from the people. Are you okay if 10 minutes over? Would that be okay?
Yeah, we should. Look, depends on how many questions you guys ask. That'll determine how long this takes. If you guys stay silent, this will take about another minute. But we'll see how we go. So we talked a bit about this idea of the meta thinking. We call that a subject-object switch. So subject are the things that we are subject to. Object are the things we can hold and reflect on. So they're an object to us. We can look at them and we can see them. Whereas subject, they just happen to us. So the classic is like subject would be, you said something and it made me angry. Has anybody have you heard that from somebody? You made me angry.
All the time. Teenagers, remember?
Teenagers. Yeah. Marcus, you are subject to your emotions. You made me angry. An object way of looking at that would be, they've said something and my reaction to that was to become angry. It's a subtle difference there, but it's quite profound because it's a very short step from there to, I wonder why I reacted that way. That's now you're holding your emotion object so that you can reflect upon it. The other thing that's happening there is the agency has moved. When you're subject to something, you have no agency over it. When it's object to you, you have agency over it. One of the classic quotes in adult development is, in between stimulus and response is a moment. And if we're aware of that moment, all of our power to change is in that moment. So if you're aware that something that has been said is making you angry, or that you are responding in a way that is anger, you have a chance to reflect on that and change your reaction. Hang on, do I want to get angry at this? Is it appropriate to get angry at this? Why am I feeling angry at this? What would be a better response? So if you can move something from subject to object, you get control over it.
Yeah.
And this growth between stages is basically just a whole series of making more and more things object. From simple things like your reaction to something somebody's saying, right up to your own mental models become object to you. So a subject where I think about, I am a project manager. I am my job. I am my idea. Have you ever had one of those where you're discussing ideas and somebody takes it really, really personally? It's like you've said their idea's not good. It's like you've stabbed them in the heart. They've taken it so badly. because they and their ideas are not separate. I am my ideas. Whereas in an object way of looking at that, I work in project management. I have a job. I have an idea. I have an idea. I'm holding it here. It's not part of me. Do what you like with it. So this idea of subject-object is really, really crucial to adult development. And the trick in vertical coaching is to get people to see more things as object. So become subject to less and hold more things as object. That's the key there. So there's a couple of techniques. Has anybody got any questions there? Because I've got a couple of techniques for this. So the first technique is what we call the balcony view. And this is getting, basically, if you imagine you're in a nightclub and you're on the dance floor and you're grooving on down, probably grooving better than I am because I'm the worst dancer in the universe, all you can really see is the bodies right around you and the flashing lights, and you can't see very much outside your own immediate surrounds. But what's this dude up on the balcony seeing, looking down on the dance floor? What can they see that people on the floor can't see? What they can see is patterns. So, looking down on the floor, oh look, here's this big group of people. Why is there that big group of people? Oh look, they're clustered around a really attractive person. Oh look, here's this big group of people. Oh, that's the line for the bar. Oh, people standing in a straight line. Big long queue, that must be the ladies. Little queue, that must be the gents. Because the queue for the ladies is always 10 times longer. Getting up on the balcony allows you to see patterns. And seeing patterns is the first step to seeing systems and complexity and being able to hold things as object. So if you're on the dance floor and suddenly you're crowded in and you don't know why, you're subject to that crowd. If you can look up above and go, oh, I've drifted near the bar and I'm sort of getting in the way of the bar queue, that makes a lot of sense. I can just move this way and I'll be free to boogie on down in, with some space around me. So encouraging people to get up on the balcony and look at the system is the first technique in adult development. So whenever there's a problem, it's okay, let's step back a little and let's look at the whole system here. We've got a problem in this team, they're not doing the right thing. Okay, let's take a step up and let's look at the whole system. What are the inputs to the team? What are the outputs to the team? Where's this blockage coming from a balcony view? And being able to see that system is the first step in being able to hold things as object or hold the system as object rather than just be subject to it. You're in a team and you're getting work thrown at you, you're kind of subject to that. If you take a step back and go, why is work being thrown at me? Let's look up, let's look at the system. Oh, look, it's because this team is pushing more work into the system than the system can handle. I wonder why they're doing that. Let's look at, and this is where you can start to see the patterns emerge, and you're no longer just, you're no longer sitting at your desk going, why are they working me so hard? You're actually able to hold that more as the object. Questions?
You got to make the system transparent for it to be effective.
Yes. Oh yeah. Some systems are very hard to see, and this is probably one of the roles of the coach, is to help people see the system, and that may be by, as you say, making the system transparent. If it's a completely opaque, if it's a complete black box, then yeah, by definition you are subject to that black box because you have no idea what's going on there. It's just a black box. The red light lights up and you do this, the green light lights up and you do that. Why? I have no idea. I'm completely subject to that. If I can open up the black box and have a look inside, now I can see what's going on.
Dave,
yep.
Going back to what Steve said about ANC, right? In system change principles, you make the smallest change to get the maximum input rather than breaking everybody to say that get out of the room, right? That's the difference between So would that be a correlation around here as well?
Yeah, I mean, breaking everything up is going to it's going to make the system really hard to see for a start, because there is no system anymore. The system is now chaos, which in chaos there is kind of no pattern and there's no system to see, so you are almost automatically subject to the system. If you're making small changes, then yeah, you can actually you can do some experimentation, you can start to look at the impacts on the system. So yeah, that kind of Kanban style change, it's a small incremental change, or the lean change model of small incremental change, is probably an easier one for people to hold as object. These huge blow up the world type of changes, it's very, very hard for people to get a handle on that, because all the systems are gone.
And that's kind of what happened in ANZ as well, in one sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and honestly, if I was running an ANZ transformation, I probably wouldn't have done it that way. It probably made some consultants very, very rich doing that, but yeah, it's not, and I don't think it's a healthy way of doing the transformation. But for pretty much a coach change hat on for being, sometimes you do have to blow some stuff up to unstick things, because that you can get stuck. Yeah, if you do too small a change, then organisational inertia just sucks it back. But you've got to scale the change right. Just blowing the whole thing up is...
Jim Collins in his book talks about turning the flywheel, which is what you're talking about there, Dave. He talks about small incremental changes all the time rather than blowing it up. And he said...
That's it.
All the great companies did the flywheel model. They didn't blow everything up. And even if you look at the world, ING's transformation was going for 7 years before they got the big consultancies involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I've got a question. If you have time.
Yeah, sure.
So when you present this metaphor to your clients, standing on the balcony, looking at the dancers on the floor below, does anyone ever question that, hey, you're speaking in metaphors, and what does it look like when you're smack in the middle of it in reality, and you're talking about a corporate context? Has that ever happened?
So some people love a metaphor, some people don't. Some people are very, very concrete in their thinking. Yeah. Often that heavily concrete thinking does tend to imply a socialized state of mind, whereas people who are more self-authored or more self-transforming tend to think a lot more in metaphor and story. So yeah, as a coach, you've got to judge who you're talking to. And one of the key skills you can develop is having a sense of their state of mind, or their habit of mind, as you're talking to them. As you're talking to them, you go, oh, they're sounding quite self-authored. I can talk to them in this way, and that'll land nicely. Or they're coming across quite socialised. I'll need to talk to them in this way. Otherwise, they're going to accuse me of just being airy-fairy and talking in stories. So you've got to judge your audience.
Yeah.
Okay. Second technique, perspective taking. So you've just come out of a meeting, your perspective, that other person, they're obstructive, ignorant, wrong, stupid, manipulative. Yeah, we've all had those sort of meetings. That's my perspective. What's their perspective? I don't know. What are they thinking about me? This is something that a lot of people never ask. I have my perspective on the way the meeting went, and that's the perspective that's right, because it's mine and I'm right. I try and look at what the trick is, to look at it from their perspective. Why would they have just done the thing that they were doing? And the important question is, what story would they be telling right now about me? So I'm telling a story about them. I'm telling the story of how obstructive and ignorant and horrible they were. What story are they telling about me? How would they have seen that same interaction? Would they have seen me as awesomely helpful and great, or would they be saying something similar about me? Now, I'm imagining that, but I'm still trying to take a perspective. The only way I can actually validate that other perspective is to go and ask them. And go, hey, that didn't go so well. How was it for you? So starting to get other people's perspectives in, because this is, again, something, if we can hold as object other perspectives, it gives us another window into the world. A really good trick for this, if you're in a meeting and there's two sides just arguing and they're not going to give ground, if you can, as a facilitator, just get, for 5 minutes, get each of them to argue the other one's position. Okay, stop, guys. You argue his position, you argue his position for 5 minutes. And it's amazing how quickly that will actually bring the perspectives together. It's a really good trick, that one, if you can get them to do it.
That's very similar to the deep democracy approach, actually, which has done some really powerful stuff in South Africa. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, there's a reason the deep democracy approach did it that way, because it's taking a lot of lessons from psychology. So that's basically the end of what I've got to say to you, except if you've got questions for me. Anything.
Steve has a wicked laugh. Out with it.
Steve.
I'm going to flip to my shameless plug and just leave that there while I try and have a look at the chat and see what's going on in there.
Oh, there's been a bunch.
83 messages in the chat. Goodness me.
It's not.
See how much we are paying attention to you.
See, Dave, if you keep talking, everyone will keep chatting and then they'll have something to say.
By the way, guys, I know before Dave continues, I am going to post this question in LinkedIn because Steve gave so many golden nuggets. I'll be posting to all the participants, what was your best nugget you take? So make a note of that. So this would be a conversation which will start in LinkedIn immediately after.
Yeah, sounds good, Shaq.
So
yeah, sounds good.
I've written at least 5, which I'm going to, do I have rights to pass that on, Dave?
As a general rule, everything I put together is licensed Creative Commons, share with attribution. So go for it.
No, your golden nuggets. You use a couple which were like solid.
Oh, yeah, like I said, everything I say is public domain. Use it.
And guys,
Dave,
if you'd like to stay a bit longer to chat with Dave, if you're...
Yeah, I'm happy to stay and chat.
We can do that.
I was actually wondering, there were a few people who joined later who we couldn't introduce, so Pooja and Navneet, if you guys want to introduce yourself. Suddenly I've caught them off guard.
Yeah.
I think there's a Jane Lee.
Jeanne Lee, yeah, she's also there. Navneet is asking a question, where do we put recordings of these sessions? I don't know, actually.